Okay, let's do this. So first off, welcome. Uh, Thank you for being here. It's nice to see your names. It's like, which actually, this will kind of connect us to where we're going right at the beginning here, because um, Jeannine had the brilliant idea of maybe starting this with a little brief kind of meditation connection activity, which I think is a great way to do this, especially in this context where, we don't get to see you and we don't get to connect in kind of normal ways, right? Maybe we can connect this way. So, Jeannine, I don't know if you want to just jump in, take it over, introduce yourself, whatever you want to do.
I would love to. Hello, everybody. I'm Jeannine Kim, and Jeff and I have been hanging out for a while, and we're excited to bring forth ideas and wisdom around how to stay psychic and where we could find that within our brains. But before we jump in, I would love to connect in the heart space if you can. So we'll just do a brief um, little meditation and breathing. So just get comfy wherever you're at and go ahead and close your eyes. Yes, you can. And if you want, go ahead and put your hands right on your heart. I may not be able to see you, but I can feel you. And I would love for all of us to feel this collective back. So eyes closed, put your hips into wherever you are seated or lying down. Really feel your sit bones. Feel your feet. And together, let's take 3 cleansing breaths through the nose. Big breath in. And on the inhale, feel the belly fill up with breath, the chest fill up with breath. Big breath in, hold it in. Take in a little more. And exhale. Collapse the belly, navel to the spine. Squeeze like a sponge. Just let it all flow out through the nose. And again, big breath in. Belly first. Fills up. And lungs. Now feel the breath move into the arms, top of the head, down into the hips, the legs, the feet. Take in a little bit more breath. And exhale. Let it drain out, bringing yourself present into your heart space, into your tailbone, all the way out. And final breath, big breath in. Lead with the belly. Bring it up into the chest. Drop the shoulders, open the throat. Breath enters the mind, the legs, the feet, the toes, the fingers. Now feel the breath push beyond the skin into the aura. Make it big, take in a little bit more breath. Top of the head, bottom of the feet, and exhale. Fully drain. And remain here with your regular breathing. Just notice how the breath wants to be. Let it lead the way. Bring your awareness into the heart space. All 4 chambers of the heart. And then take a moment to sense the hearts of everybody here. And instead of seeing form of other, just settle into sensing the energy of our collective container. Taking a couple more breaths. Again, settling into the heart, the hips, and the feet, draining the mind. And then when you're ready, bring your hands down and open your eyes. And then we could begin.
Thank you, Jeannine. That was lovely.
Welcome. Thank you.
So, I'm wondering if maybe, well, actually, let me describe kind of the format that we kind of came up with today so people know what we're doing here. So now we're all connected, which is very nice. And so kind of what we wanted to do was we wanted to share a little bit about, we're coming from two different perspectives here. I mean, they go together, which is, I think, what we're going to be really kind of exploring here. But it seemed like it would make sense for us to talk first about Jeannine and some of her work as a psychic medium and some of the work she does with past life readings, as well as astrology, how that all fits in with the work she does with people and teaching people how to access these abilities themselves and this information for their own health and well-being, right? And then kind of leading it into, Jeannine and I have been working together off and on for a couple of years now. And I finally got the opportunity to measure Jeannine's brain. I made a little trip to where she's at, and we did some experiments. And so, at some point during this session, I want to share some of that data, and we can kind of talk about what it looks like and what that might mean, as well as what are the implications for how to use this information so that maybe it can help us develop our own abilities, right? How can we learn to kind of tap into our own states of consciousness in ways that might facilitate our own psi abilities? So that's kind of the agenda. And so we're going to start off. I'm going to kind of interview you, Jeannine.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right. Seems like a good place to start.
Yes.
And even though I know the answers to some of these questions, it's always fun to kind of hear them again or hear them in a different context. Um, and so the first question seems like maybe an obvious one, but so I mean, have you always been a psychic or a medium or did you were just born, you came out of the womb with psychic abilities, or like when did you first figure out that this was like a thing for you?
That's a great question. And, I suppose, well, there's two answers to that. First of all, I suppose, like anything, you just are who you are and you imagine the whole world is this way, right? But now that I'm kind of up in the years, there's the hindsight bit. So that's the second part of the answer. And this first came to be for me that my earliest memory is when I was about 5 or 6, actually. And so was I born this way? I fully believe so. I know that this ability was sharp when I was younger. I thought everybody was like this. I didn't know it was a thing. But the way it would present itself was, I specifically remember my mother and I were going on a drive, and we were going to do this like little photo shoot thing over for the newspaper. I was adopted, and so this was for the Cradle in Evanston in Chicago. And we had never been there before, and this is like the 70s. So, she didn't have GPS or anything, and my mother was trying to find her way, and the whole time I'm saying, Mom, I know what this house looks like. I had a dream about it last night. And I started explaining the whole house. And it's funny because even when I close my eyes to this day, I see the house. I said there were 2 Christmas trees on either side of the garage door. So like 2 little evergreens. And the walkway kind of scooped around to the front door. And it was brown. It was 2-story. And so she's just like, yeah, trying to find her way. And then we get there and she just looked up and froze. And so the poor woman, I mean, here she is like, what was that? Right. In her defense. But as a child, it scared me. I felt wrong. I kept asking her, hey, look. And she just, nothing. And so, my little brain at that time, I'm sure everybody wants to please their mom. And so it didn't feel right. And so we just didn't talk about it anymore. And there were other instances after that continued. And so, I moved out when I was fairly young, about 17 years old. And so I tucked away that beingness the way that I was, and I went into straight survival mode. But then things had happened afterwards, like during my 20s, that I had to find my way to better health. When I first moved out survival mode, it was like Taco Bell, 59 cents tacos, McDonald's, things like that. And, it was great. If I was a waitress, I would just eat the food that was there. But my body couldn't take it. My body could not take it. And so I was, really drawn to healthy foods. I started doing yoga in the early 90s. And all of a sudden, the minute I started doing these things, other aspects of my being became more prominent. Like that stuff that I pushed back had space now to move forward. And that way of living didn't make me like I was, it supported it. Because what I've come to really understand after living this way and then studying it for years is that we are all energy first. So those choices that I were making were a little bit of a different energetic frequency. And then I was in the financial industry. Lo and behold, I couldn't keep that going anymore because it wasn't my truth. And everything I was doing, yoga, getting massages, eating organic in the 90s. There was like one Whole Foods in Chicago on the west side. Like I couldn't, I just couldn't hold it in anymore. And vegetarian, and my Catholic family in Chicago were like, what? It's not, Friday at Easter. Why are you not eating meat? Like nothing could sustain who I was anymore. And so my truth just kept getting louder, and it drew me to healing work. And the partner I was with at the time, we moved to California, and I thought I found Shangri-La right there. I mean, they had organic fast food places, Whole Foods on every corner, and people who like spoke my language. And I started to go to school at night while I was working as an IPO trader in the day. And I went to school at night for healing, and I became Reiki trained and massage therapist and yoga instructor. And then I had these fabulous teachers who were like, you're seeing something when you're doing those massages. I'm like, no, I'm not. I thought they would think I was crazy. And so they coaxed it out of me. I was fortunate enough to have that support. So I've always been psychic, but I found my way there through living it. So yeah.
And so it's interesting because it kind of sounds like you're suggesting that at least for you, your lifestyle really made a big difference in terms of your ability to kind of connect with that part of yourself or those abilities. And I know you've worked with a lot of students, over the years. Have you found that to be fairly consistently true with other people as well?
Yes, completely. I was going through, I was really, having landed in California at the time, like this is like late 90s, early 2000s, right? And there was just all of the stuff that I had studied about and read about that I wanted in Chicago that wasn't there. And so I was doing a lot of fasting, and I was a vegetarian at the time. And the more fasting I did, when I would get into these states of fasting and cleansing, I noticed that my psi abilities were amplified, like they were just amplified. And on top of it, and this is the big piece of sustainability that I know that during our retreat, we're really going to dive into. But the more I did healing work on myself and my family trauma, my own trauma, my spiritual stuff, it would level me up and level me up. And it would shift my energy. And then I would be able to tap into other frequencies even clearer. And I see this with my clients all the time, because everything is energy first. So when they shift the energy of their environment externally, their environment internally, they're tuning an instrument. I always say, this is our instrument. So without a doubt, these are the things that support what I believe. Everybody has this ability. I know I have an awareness of it, and I remember it when I was young, but we're all like this. I'm just the canary in the coal mine. That is my firm belief. So those things do support. Yes.
Yeah. So it's interesting because, in some ways, I think that connects with where we're going to go later in this conversation with the brain, because, sort of, my perspective is we're also sort of fine tuning the brain. And it also makes sense that diet and lifestyle, it's going to influence how well you can fine tune the brain. If the brain's inflamed, if it's aggravated, if it's stressed,
Yep.
if it's undernourished, you're not going to be able to help it shift into whatever it needs to do to be flexible, right? And to be more open. It's going to be in sort of survival mode.
I love that you said that because, even when you just think of the concept of survival mode, when you're in survival mode, the whole nervous system is, whether you're conscious of survival mode or you're just kind of caught up in, our quick moving life, but the body doesn't have space enough to be able to read certain things. Like you have to fight a little harder to drop into the empty, to be able to receive the frequencies. And because it's just like tuning a radio, what I see is out there is just me clicking into that frequency and then it comes in. But we have to really have like that parasympathetic nervous system engaged. And the parasympathetic nervous system is the rest and relaxation. And so, like you said, the food, the inflamed brain makes so much sense. And we've known for years the belly and the brain kind of, I love to say, go together like peanut butter and jelly. So when the belly's inflamed, so is the brain, right? And the different chemicals. I mean, there's big pieces of this. I know we could unpack on another day, but yeah, that's absolutely true.
Okay. So yeah, you're right. I mean, this could be a whole workshop all by itself, right?
Yes,
Is kind of,
yes.
yeah. Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe we should,
Yep,
yeah, that could be
I would love to do that. Yep, yep, yep.
workshop number 2.
Then my husband doesn't have to listen to me talk about it anymore. And my kids, I'm like, oh, good, she's talking about it somewhere else.
So let me just shift gears a little bit. So I'm curious about this. I talk to a lot of mediums and psychics and various research that I do and different interview things and whatever. And everybody's a little bit different, right? I mean, there's some common themes sometimes, and there's a lot of differences. So I'm curious on the topic of spirit guides. So do you have guides? Do you have entities that you communicate with that provide you with information? And if not, or if so, or whatever, where do you get your information? Like what is it? How do you tap into it, and where is it out there?
I love this question. I know you and I have chatted about this briefly before. I don't know if I ever told you this story though, but I don't use guides. Now, let me say this: if I'm like talking to a dead person, like that's a dead person, so I'm talking to that one. And sometimes there are beings that come in for the people that I'm reading that are very clear front and center, but they typically come with the people that I am reading for. So they're not like a set of my own guides. And I have this best friend from years ago who's a psychic in California, and she would talk to her guides. And when I was first learning this, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm totally doing this wrong. I don't have any guides. Like, how come I don't have any guides? Maybe I'm not supposed to be doing this. It's not working or whatever. And it turns out I don't know if I'm a lone ranger out there or what, but I get quiet and the information, there's nobody there. It just comes right through me. Now, there have been some occasions, I know when you and I've worked together as well, where I'll have for a situation a specific guide, very situation specific, where that one will show up or a group of them. But again, it almost for me feels like they show up for the situation as opposed to like, a whole group that come along with me. Yeah.
Right. Or like your go-to,
Right.
like,
Right.
yeah, interesting. And so this may or may not be connected, but I know, a piece of work that I think is something that you really enjoy. At least that's what I'm gathering from our conversations. And it's actually what we did most of your brain mapping on, was doing past life readings.
Right.
And so of all the different people that I've studied and done whatever, I think you're the only person that has done past life readings.
Yeah.
So I don't know much about it, right? And so like, can you just start at the beginning, right? Like, so how does that work exactly? I mean, I think I intuitively know, right? But do you want to give like a brief description of how that works for you?
Sure. And yes, it's definitely a niche market, I guess, in the psychic world. But it's I'll tap into somebody, and the way I've come to understand this is that, you know, we bring to our clients or even to our life, our relationships, that which we are. And I'm kind of like a go deep or go home type of a gal. And so even in my early years, when I was really starting to formulate my ability as an intuitive, I would just immediately start to see the people that I was reading somewhere else. I could smell the place. I could hear what's going on in the neighborhood. I could see where it is. I could see the time. And I learned how to hone in and ask for names and places and years that it's happened. And how, to get back to your question, the way it works is that I love to see the past lives, not just for the sake of seeing them. I mean, that's like super fun. Who doesn't want to know who they were back in the day, right? I know it's fun for me, but I want to do it for a reason for healing. And so I'm deep, and past lives are like the roots to me of the trauma that is currently happening in your life today. And so I created this program about 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, called Into the Mystic. And so what we do is we pull out the core wound, not just, we have many lives, but the core wound where this really began, the trauma and the mastery, because they go hand in hand, for each chakra. And when we release that, then there is something that happens in today that it's not so charged anymore. And then you work with it quite consciously because you have the name, you saw the story, and it blows my mind every time that when these past lives come up, my clients are like, oh my gosh, that's almost exactly what happened to me in this life. And I don't know their stories. But for me, we repeat, we repeat, we repeat until we can break through. And so when I go to the past lives, it is a little different than mediumship. It is a little different than regular channeling. I'll ask for the channel and then I'll be directed to the deeper work. And that's the past lives.
So, you brought up the idea that this is kind of a niche kind of a thing, right? Like
Yeah,
not
right.
everybody does this. Um, and so it's an interesting question because, like I think you and I both have the opinion that in general, psychic abilities are kind of a natural process that, it, largely my belief is we kind of get in our own way of
Yeah.
being able to access these things. But that we all have the potential. Um, but so I'm curious about this, right? With the specific thing with past life readings, because it's like, well, wait a minute, I know a lot of mediums and psychics, and they don't do that. Um, and so it's like, so is this something that everybody can do, or is this something that's like, well, this seems like it's just for whatever reason a little more specific and
That's such a good question. I really feel like everybody can do it. And this is where, our intention comes in, and, how deep we want to go when we do reading work, how we want to work with it. And for me, again, it's kind of like everything is energy first. So I don't let myself or the people that I teach get caught up with form or place or time. Everything is frequency driven. So in other words, and I totally get it, and I respect some people who just do like animals, or they just do mediumship. That's, hey, that's their journey. Like I'm not there to question it. But whenever I work with the energy, it's really like I just, if I let go of the form and I don't let the form get in my way, then I can access all of it. And so I could show people, and I do show people, how to call forth and to be, subtly focused on the past life story. And then it comes. It's just allowing yourself to know that one is not better or different or harder than the other.
I mean, it sounds a little bit like the way I think about different styles of meditation, where it's like, well, it depends on how you're using your attention and your intention. And,
Love that.
you
Yeah,
know, and so it kind of reminds me a little bit about that. I mean, is that fair, do you think?
completely. That's exactly it. Yeah. The attention and the intention for sure.
Okay. So I want to get over to the brain stuff in a few minutes, but before we do that, what kind of advice or I'm assuming that the majority of people watching this, either now or in the future, right? They're interested in this, right?
Right.
They're probably working on their own psychic development, or maybe they're already, you know, have developed a good potential to kind of tap in. So, what advice or tips, would you have for people that are really wanting to cultivate their own abilities, and go deeper with their own work?
Well, usually, yeah, go ahead.
Eat vegetarian.
No, 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 no. You don't have to do that. Well, I mean, if you're moved to do it, go for it, man. But typically, what I tell people when they ask me, what do you do to to become psychic? And when I have, like my Into the Mystic program specifically, I'm like, okay, there's two main things that we focus on. One is trust, and two, get empty. And so let me take that a little bit farther. And I know again in our retreat we're going to deep dive this. I mean, there's more layers, but for the basic needs of our webinar today is, so if I say to you trust and get empty, what typically happens is that when we do get empty, or when we tap that empty place, it's not only about being with that emptiness in the meditation room. That is very important because you build a relationship with what empty feels like. My invitation to people is to say, bring that empty into every moment of your life. When you're standing there doing dishes, can you drop into that feeling tone space that that meditation feels like, but begin to do it with your eyes open. And, becoming psychic or being psychic or tapping into your own abilities, this is an invitation to living differently. It's an invitation to healing yourself. It's an invitation to healing family trauma, old stories and dynamics that you're done with, but it requires little bits of work every single day and coming home to this. And then trusting little things on a daily basis that come up. For instance, say like you're at the grocery store. And actually, Eric Schiffman taught me this back in the day in Santa Barbara when I was in yoga training. And he would, at the time, he would just set his watch because we didn't really do the cell phone thing. And so he would say, okay, I'm at the grocery store. And every 10 minutes, he would set the clock and he'd say, when the 10-minute comes, I'm going to ask, what should I buy? And I'm going to hear what it says. And so one day, the 10-minute marker comes off and he's in front of the bread. And somebody said, and here's Wonder Bread, white bread. He's like, what? Wonder Bread? I haven't bought Wonder Bread since like the 60s. And so, but he's like, he bought it anyway. And then he's like, sure enough, somewhere down the line, a couple days later, somebody came over to his house and the mother was with, and she had some tooth thing and she couldn't eat anything but that soft bread. Now, this is not to say that every single time you listen that it's going to come out with that. But the little things you could do is start to be okay with it. And it's coming back home and trusting our feelings deeper into our body other than just what we get intellectually. So trust, empty, and practice that in every moment of the day, every moment of the day. For starters.
Makes sense.
It sounds simple, but it's, you come up against a lot of your conditioning, which is the fun part. So it's a revolutionary life. It's great.
Yeah. I actually got this little download myself. This was years ago. I was going to a Qigong retreat out in the middle of the woods in Tennessee. And I think I even pulled over to write this down, but like this sort of understanding, and it wasn't necessarily for psychic stuff, although I've gone like, oh, this applies, I think. And it ties into what you were saying. So slow down, relax, listen, trust, allow.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good download, man. That is a great download.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
want to make a t-shirt out of that.
I was just gonna say you should make a t-shirt out of it. I love it.
All right, I'll make a t-shirt. We'll sell it together.
Yay. Sounds good.
um, so I wanted to, is this an okay place to transition over to looking at some of your brain stuff?
Sure. This is my one of my favorite parts because I learned so much from you. I'm ready.
Cool. So let me pull it up. So kind of what I thought we would do for this particular session, right, is, because when I went to go visit you, when was that? Was that November?
Last June.
June. Why did I say November?
I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't even make sense.
That's all right.
But when I went to visit you, one of the main things that we did was this kind of past life reading, but it was in a specific context, and you may want to comment on it. But the short story, I kind of tried to outline it on this slide where you did it all through Zoom. So you and I were hanging out at your space where you're at right now. And I had you all hooked up with the EEG stuff. And we got a baseline of you sitting there doing nothing. And we got a baseline of you having just a regular conversation, but not doing a reading. And then we had a Zoom meeting, a group reading with 5 students. And you called it a satsang. Am I saying that correctly?
Yep. Yep.
I had to Google it to say what exactly is it. That's why I put the definition on here. I'm like, what is that?
Love that. A lot of people ask. I'm glad you have it there.
Yeah, it's actually a really cool word, right? So wholesome and uplifting company, good company, especially on the spiritual path. I'm like, that's nice. Okay. So kind of like a sangha.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so you did this set of readings, and the way you did it, first you did kind of a reading for the whole group. So something that would kind of applied to everybody, which I thought was really interesting. Like, how do you do a reading that applies to 5 different people, right? Like, but somehow it worked, right?
It does all the time. It freaks me out, but it works.
Yeah. But then you kind of went to each person and did I don't know if it was a brief reading or not. I mean, they were usually about 10 minutes or so reading, and every single one of them was a past life reading. And I don't think we planned that necessarily, but it's kind of what happened. And so, and then afterwards you did kind of a clearing meditation. And so we had tons and tons and tons of EEG data, and it took me about 6 months to analyze all this stuff. So sorry about that, but and so
all right, it's worth the wait. It's been a lot long, many other lifetimes. I wish I had that information. So what's a couple more months?
So what was really fun about this that I've never had the opportunity to do before, because normally when I have measured the brainwave activity of a medium or a psychic doing their thing, it's one reading. So it's one reading with one person, and we're kind of done. And so this was the first time where it was kind of like, 5 in a row readings. And it's like, okay, this is interesting, right? Because for me, one of the curious questions was, are they all going to look the same? Is your brain going to look the same for all readings or not? And what would that mean? So let's get to your brain. Holy smokes, that's a whole lot of brains.
It looks so pretty, Jeff.
It does look pretty.
You did a great job. I love it.
And so just to describe to people that are watching this that maybe don't have a background in neurofeedback or quantitative EEG, I know some people do because I saw some of the names. But for those of you that don't, basically, we're looking at different frequencies of brainwave activity. So you can kind of think about it like the colors of the rainbow, right? Like, so red is a different frequency than yellow. Yellow's a different frequency than blue, right? They're all different frequencies. And so the brain kind of has different colors of brainwave activity, but we call them delta, theta, alpha, beta, high beta, gamma. At least that's what we're using in this context. Delta is the slowest brain waves, and then they're going all the, from slow to fast. So gamma is the fastest. And what these different little head maps are basically showing us is it's showing us the difference. So it's looking at the difference between Jeannine's brain doing nothing or actually having a normal conversation and doing a past life reading. So on each of these head maps, the colors mean something important. So if the color is green, then basically that means there was no real change between the two different conditions. So wherever it's green, it's kind of like, yeah, having a regular conversation and doing a reading, it's kind of the same. Where there are brighter colors, and the brighter colors go yellow, orange, red, and then gray. It looks gray on the screen here. It's actually white, but it looks gray. So that means that there's a significant increase of whatever that is. So the brighter the color, the bigger the increase of that activity during the reading. And then when there's cool colors, so light blue going into darker blues, then that means there's a decrease of that activity during the past life reading. So hopefully that makes at least some sense, and it'll make more sense as we go through this. Now there's 5 lines because there was 5 students, right? So the first line, and I put them in order, right? So the first line up here was student number 1, second line is student 2, et cetera, et cetera. So when I'm looking at this, the first thing that I'm looking at is what are the patterns, right? In terms of what's consistent. And so for me, the first thing that stands out is this high beta. And the reason it stands out is because it's almost identical right down the row for every single person. I mean, it looks almost exactly the same. And so that's compelling, right? Because it's like, well, okay, well, whatever's going on there, it seems to be part of the process for everybody, no matter who you're reading, right? So what does that mean? Well, that's the $1,000,000 question, right? Like, what does that mean? And so high beta is a fast brainwave, right? So usually the implication is that when there's more high beta, there's more activation, right? That part of the brain is more busy. It's involved with something. And you can see it's the frontal lobes that are really lit up. And it's kind of leaning over to the right, right? It's kind of slanted a little bit. So there may be a little bit more action on the right side than the left, but it's really the whole frontal lobes seem to be involved up here. And so on the surface, that's kind of curious, right? Because it's kind of like, well, wait a minute, like, you were just talking about kind of shutting off your brain, right? And then here
Right.
we got like a whole bunch of fast brain waves up in your frontal lobe. And it's like, well, wait a minute, what the heck's going on here? Now remember, this is only one piece of the puzzle, right? Like we've got all these things to look at. But so my first impression, so what I want to do is kind of share my impressions of what I think it might mean and see if that fits for you, Jeannine. And then
Okay.
we can kind of sleuth it out together.
Yes, I love that.
So for me, the first thing I think about is when the frontal lobes get activated, especially the right side, it tends to be associated with more of a focused attention, a sustained attention, right? So like when you're really focused on something, and you're tuned everything else out, right? You're going to see, so this happens during like a focused meditation. Like when you're putting your full attention on your breath or on a mantra
Right.
or whatever, right? Like it's going to light up that right frontal lobe in particular. So that's the first thing I think of, right? Is it's like you must be shifting your attention during a psychic or a past life reading in a way that's different than just having a normal conversation. You have to be zoned in. This is my interpretation. You have to be zoned in a different way. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's totally fair. So, in other words, what you're saying is I'm really paying attention to something, even though I'm in this meditative space, like something very active is happening
Yeah.
each time.
Yeah. Does that feel right?
Well, and it's funny because even when I go into meditation, like I get so much information. And when I'm sitting there, it's as if I'm suspended in a room that has it's not even a room because there's nothing out there, but it's just the information is pouring down like rain all over me everywhere. And I just don't get the visual. I get smells, sounds, feelings, emotions, like I get it all. And so what I have to do is really pay attention and piece it all together, or really sense what is the most potent for what we're there to do today. And then oftentimes, because something is a sensation or a specific visual, with no words, like I have to find the best word to say. And so there's a lot going on, and I'm trying to distill it down and bring them the most potent that they need for the moment. Would that be what that part of the brain does?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Right. I mean, yeah, I mean, your description, I think fits perfectly, right, with what we, why there might be so much activity there. Not only, I mean, it could be partially there just from the sheer amount of information that your brain has to process, right? Like, there's a ton of information coming in, like you said, and somehow you have to make some sense out of it.
Right.
And
Right.
so,
And yeah.
that's going to require some level of frontal lobe activation, right, to sort of figure this all out. And not
Wow.
only that, then you have to distill like what's important, what's not important. How do I translate this? How do I communicate it, you know, in more or less real time,
Yeah.
right? So that's a tremendous, that makes sense, right? Like, well, no wonder you kind of need your frontal lobes for that. Um,
Right. Right.
uh, they're kind of working overtime in some ways. Um,
Yes.
and it also makes sense that that would be a consistency across kind of everybody, because even though everybody might be different, your job, at least on that level, is going to be the same, right? You still have to process all this information.
Ah, I
Uh,
get it. I get it. That's why that's the main one that kind of stays that way, while everything else may have some adjustments.
maybe. I mean, I think that makes sense, though. I like that. I like that
Yeah,
interpretation.
it makes sense totally.
Yeah. So let's jump over to a couple of other things that I think are interesting. And we're not going to be able to hit every piece of this, right? We'd be here for days.
Right.
Um, but I like this too. This is a very interesting little pattern. So this increase of delta and theta in the left, kind of temporoparietal area, right? So the temporal lobes are on the side, the parietal lobe is kind of in this back quadrant. So it's kind of like on both. And, we don't see it everywhere, but you see it here. You see it with student 3. You see it a little bit with student 2, but not very
Mhm.
much.
Right.
And you see it a lot with student 5. So you don't see it with everybody, but you see it pretty consistently.
What is that part of the brain for?
What is that part of the brain? So there's two issues here. One, when there's an increase of slow brain waves. So remember, delta and theta are the slowest brain waves.
Yeah.
And so when there's an increase of that activity, even though you're increasing activity, it's a slow brain wave. So it actually means that it's kind of shutting down.
Increasing the slowness.
It's increasing the slowness,
Got
right?
it.
So,
Yeah.
so think about like how most people think about delta. Most people, it's like, delta, doesn't that mean you're asleep? And it's like, well, that's an oversimplified understanding of delta. But in some ways it makes sense, because the more slow activity you have, the more the
Right.
brain is kind of shut down,
Got it.
right?
Makes sense.
So when there's a bunch of delta and theta back there, it's kind of saying that that part of the brain is not doing its job. it's it's
Whoa.
it's it's not doing its normal job. It's doing something,
Right.
but it's not doing its normal job. And that part of the brain, obviously every part of the brain does lots of things, right? But the one thing that really stands out for me thinking about that particular region is sort of language comprehension. Um, if that's a way to put it, right? So receptive language. So taking in language-based information and making sense out of it. So, it could be reading, or it could be hearing, or it could be other ways of getting that kind of data
Right.
and then making some sense out of it. And, it's interesting that that part of your brain is kind of shut down. And it makes me, so here's what I wonder. And again, you can tell me if it makes sense or not. So what I wonder is, you said you get information pretty much from all the different clairs, all the different senses. So
Yep.
visual, auditory, olfactory, whatever, feeling. So it makes me wonder if in those circumstances where that was coming through really strong, I wonder if it was more, you were getting a lot of clairaudient information. You were hearing information, but yet your brain had to kind of like, don't process this like normal information, right? Don't
Wow.
process this
Right.
like normal, like having a normal, like you and me talking right now. Don't process it
Right.
that way. Um,
Right.
Process it a different way. Maybe it's more of an allowing. So back to my little
Mhm.
mantra that I came up with, right? Maybe it's more of like getting out of the way so that information can just come in. Like instead of trying to dissect everything and make sense out of it, can it just come in? And then I'm going to use my frontal lobes to try to understand what the heck I'm going to do with it.
Okay, that whole bit that you just explained, that's absolutely it. And I recall that the first person, we won't say his name, but it was the guy, right?
Yes.
I think it was, we went deep into a past life story for him. And I remember being there and being immersed in the visual. I think it was on a ship in Japan during a war. And I remember being there, feeling the rain, like watching him receive whatever he had to receive, like whatever he was doing. So I was there getting all this sensation, just what you were saying. I remember it even now. Like I could go back there immediately. It was dark, it was choppy. Like I really remember it. And then while I was, and in order for me to see more, in order for me to turn left or turn right, I got to even get quieter to get more of the story. Like the more relaxed I get to go farther into that past life. It's like, that's the only way it goes. But then my brain is saying, okay, I'm getting the visual, I'm getting the visual. What am I going to bring to him? It's almost like a co-creative experience with his spirits. Like his spirit wants me to see it. And the spirit also knows I want to heal from this. Whatever's going on, why it's showing it to me, it's going to help him, this guy today.
And so, this is really interesting to me because, you know, um, virtually every medium that I've kind of worked with, they usually end up shutting down certain parts of the brain and activating other parts of the brain at the same time. And it kind of makes sense, right? Like you got to get certain parts of the brain out of the way in order to receive information, but you still have to keep some activity in order to figure out what the hell's going on and be able
Exactly.
to communicate it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because if all you had was a bunch of delta and theta, you'd be in a weird tranced out state, and
Mm.
you probably wouldn't be able to bring it back
Right.
into any kind of conscious conversation,
Right.
right? So somehow you have to be able to do both.
Right.
And
And
so I
that's
think,
what I feel like I'm doing. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, it's super cool.
That is so cool, Jeff. That is so cool.
Yeah, and I just want to talk about one more pattern before we kind of shift gears here. I can't believe we're like chewing through our time really fast. I don't know how that happened. Um,
Because it's
uh,
fun.
yeah, yeah. Um, so the last one I want to bring up is this alpha, um, and especially the last two. There's this really dominant uh, decrease of alpha activity in the back of the head. You can see it a little bit in some of these other ones, but it's really strong in 4 and 5. And alpha is usually strongest with the eyes closed. Your eyes were closed during all of these recordings. Um, and so there's a huge decrease. And that could mean a couple of things, right? Because really that area where the alpha decreased is sitting on top of the default mode network, the hub of the default mode network. And the default mode network is this organizing principle of, it's the way the brain organizes your sense of self. Uh, and how do you see yourself? How do you see yourself in relation to the rest of the world? It's kind of the storyteller that creates a narrative. Oh, you're Jeannine, and you have a house, and you've got kids, and you live in a certain state, and whatever, right? It's like it creates this storyline. And when when the alpha decreases, it's almost like taking the story offline for a little while so that your mind can be more open. So this is
Ah,
actually the dominant thing that happens with psychedelics is
oh,
the primary pattern you see with psychedelics is alpha decreasing in the default mode network. And so
Whoa.
it's kind of like getting the brain out of the way so that you can access new perspectives, new insights, new ways of thinking about things, new ways of seeing the world, um, new ways of seeing your connection to the world. And so it's kind of cool that yours is dropping out, especially in a couple of them. And again, it makes me wonder, if there's something going on with them in particular, or this idea that we've talked about before that, do you have to tune in a slightly different way depending on the individual that you're reading for?
That's a big yes. And it's, I could get tons of information, and this is a part of the craft that I've had to learn through the years, just because I get the information, and typically the information I get is exactly what they need to hear. It always is. It always is. But I have so much of it that it depends on what they're ready to hear. And my egoic self doesn't decide this. I just, again, what's more front and center. And each person is different because some people may be more open. And so I literally merge with their energy. It's like a smoothie, I'm a blueberry and they're a strawberry, and go in the blender. And then, you can taste the blueberry sometimes, you get strawberry. That's what's going on in there. And so I become them a little bit. So what they're capable of and what they're ready to bring up, that's how far I can go for them. But I have to have a strong sense of self then to be able to come out. And that's where clearing practices, like when I teach this, and again, this is stuff we're going to go deep on in the retreat, is energetic hygiene is everything, because you dip it, look at all the different people. Like I have to be able to let go of myself to be with them and feel them and bring the information forth. And then I have to be able to release. Otherwise, nobody wants anybody kind of hanging all over them, forever. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, that might be a great segue. I don't think we're gonna have time to get into some of the other. Because God, I'm shocked. Well, I'm not shocked. Because it's easy to talk about this stuff and end up using a lot of time. But this idea of, I don't think I want to get into more brain maps because that would take too much time. But this idea of clearing. So again, this is another thing that I hear different stories of from different people. That it's like, you don't have to worry about that. It's fine, and other people who are very, I use this term loosely, religious about,
Yeah.
surrounding yourself with light and love and removing any, energy that's not yours and things like that. So it sounds like you fall in that camp.
Yes, I fall in that camp minus the light and love words, but I fall in that camp.
You don't like light and love?
I do, but it's no, I don't use those words.
But you're saying, sort of energetic hygiene.
Yeah. Yeah, it's frequency. And so again, to say only light is to imagine that dark is negative. And I don't find that to be the case. I feel that there's a spectrum within the light and there's a spectrum within the dark. And again, that's stuff for another day. But if you tap into a frequency that is all yours, that is fully aligned, that is your highest available personal blueprint, that is just you. And I have ways in my clearing practices that bring the energy back to you, send everybody's energy back to them through intention, like you said, intention and attention. I love that. Then once you do that, then it's your frequency alone, and nothing else can jive with it. Nothing. And so, yeah, and to me, a clearing practice is a must. We must come back to center.
Makes sense. So I like hearing that because I think I intuitively have similar feelings, but I'm not a professional psychic medium. So so I know we have a couple of questions. Before we kind of like move over to, I want to make sure to address those. But before we get that, I wanted to hit a couple of, I wanted to bring this up, right? Because you mentioned a couple of times that we're doing a retreat, which we are, and I'm super excited about it. It's coming up
So
not that far now.
oh,
So in March, in Santa Fe, beautiful Santa Fe, and it looks like it's in a really awesome location.
perfect
Um,
location.
and so, yeah, anyway, wanted to sort of bring this up just to let people watching this know, let you know that we're going to be doing 3 days of all kinds of stuff, all kinds of activities, experientials using stroboscopic light and meditation and qigong and psychic exercises and experientials and all kinds of stuff.
Healing somatic work too.
Healing somatic work, looking at brains.
Fun.
Yeah,
looking
yeah.
at past lives. Yeah.
Looking at past lives. So anyway, if this seems of interest, check it out. There's a few days left still for the early bird pricing. I'm just going to quickly put this up because it'll be recorded so that way there's ways for people to find us. There's my email, my website, Psychic Mind Science, one of my websites. There's Jeannine's info, same thing, her email, her website, which beautiful website, by the way. Self-plug for my new book. So if you're interested in some of this stuff, check out the book. It's on Audible and Kindle, and you can find it pretty much anywhere. So I'm going to get out of this screen. So we have big faces, we have big squares. Hey, here we are again.
Yay!
Yay! And I wanted to take a quick look at the questions. Actually, they're both from an old friend of mine, Dick Gennardi. Hi, Dick. He's a brainwave nerd, and I say that in the kindest way possible. So anyway, that's his angle here, right? Delta is also involved positively in abstract processing. Interesting. I didn't really think about that. So you had that giant increase of delta back here on the left side.
That was the blue. Was that the blue or the gray?
No, it was the gray back here on those, right? And we were saying maybe shut down. But so Dick's bringing up that delta is also involved in abstract processing, which is interesting. That may be an aspect of this, right? And then he also says alpha power is correlated positively with introspection and negatively with external attention. Yeah, this is true. So basically what that means, right, is when alpha is high, so that's the one at the back of your head that was blue.
Got it.
So when alpha is high, we're usually in our own little world, right? Like we're talking to ourselves, we're thinking about stuff, we're whatever. We're inside. When alpha is low, which it was for you, right? Like we're blue.
It was low. Yeah.
Then it's like you're outside.
Wow.
Your attention is outside. And so even though your eyes were closed, and normally people are in their own little world when their eyes are closed, your attention was still external in some way, right? It was.
That's bizarre because, wow. And I close my eyes specifically because I see people better and feel them and experience them in what we call in here. But where is that really? If it's a frequency, again, I'm not caught up by form. See, it's not the form, it's the frequency, right?
I love it. And the more I learn and the more I explore these things, the more those words really resonate for me and make perfect sense. And so, I'm excited to be able to work together more and learn from you. So I know we're pretty much out of time. Do you have anything you want to leave our audience with?
We're all psychic. And if you are here, I really feel like this is the cusp of where we're going in the new world, for the new world. You hear the word new world, but it's being birthed from the inside. And I literally have been calling it like rhythm revolution. And so if we just get adjusted to our own rhythm, come home to ourselves, listen and feel. Jeff and I are going to be, Jeff is more of a master of this, but together we're going to sort it out and how to activate those parts of the brain. Like Jeff does the meditations. He knows what to call them. He knows which meditations go to what part of the brain. So we could really work together to activate those. And then together, we could work together to trust what's coming through. It's a practice. So tune your instrument, trust completely what's coming through, and just practicing empty as much as you can.
Love it. We have one more question. Do you want to take it real quick?
Oh, sure. Let me see
Sure.
what.
I can read it. I'll read it just so other people
Okay,
can hear
yes.
it as
Could you
well.
read it? Yes, please.
In terms of healing, how does the client's experience getting a past life reading with you compare, would you imagine, with a past life regression where the client is hypnotized?
Okay, so there's a couple of ways that I could look at that. I know with hypnosis, it's you speak of it yourself, right? And then through the work that I do, I bring it forth for you. And I literally envision it where we hold hands, and I even tell my clients we're going in together. Don't worry, energetically they may not see it or not, but energetically it's happening. So that's one thing. And the second thing is that when I do the past lives, again, it's witnessing is healing, so I call it witness medicine. So right away, it's just like any other wound, whether it's past life or somebody sitting next to you. All it wants to be is seen and heard in order for it to start to be healed. So it comes up and out, and then the work that I do with it is I say, take the name of the individual. And when you remember the story that we went through, we remember the healing that we went through, remember the suffering, when you start to feel that same dynamic in your life right now, use that past life. We don't want to get caught up in it. We're not it anymore. It's over. But we could use that tool so we could get our mind out of the way, and we could say, no, that life's over. I'm safe. It's done. And so I could be with this dynamic. I could put it down. I could be different with it because we've worked with it so specifically. So I just don't witness it. I help my clients work with it in the integration. Yeah.
Cool.
I hope that helps.
Great answer. Okay. I think we're past time by a few minutes, but hey,
Right.
that's
It's okay. A couple of minutes here or there.
yeah, it's fine, right?
Right.
Jeannine, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's always so much fun to hang out with you and talk weird stuff.
I
Uh,
love it, Jeff.
yeah. And of course, in your world, it's not even weird. Like
It's not even weird. No, and I appreciate you. I mean, how much fun is this? Like, we're actually having a great conversation, a scientist and a psychic.
I love it.
I still want you to invent for me some kind of machine that could take my visual and put it up on a screen like in Minority Report. You and your buddies, if you could make that for me, I'd love.
Yeah, it may be a minute.
Okay, that's all right. I believe
yeah.
in you.
And thank you to everybody who showed up. Thanks for being here, paying attention. If you have any questions or any follow-up, please feel free to email either one of us. And I think we're both pretty good at getting back. Sometimes it takes me a day or two, depending on how crazy things are, but would love to hear from you and would love to be in touch. So if you need anything or you have questions or questions about the retreat, let us know. And we hope to see you all again. Well, I hope to see you sometime.
Sometime.
Yeah, in the future.
Thanks for everything, Jeff. I love the
very much.
slides and putting all the brain stuff together. Thank you as well.
Yeah.
Thanks to
Thank you
everybody.
all.
Great to see you all.
Night, night.
Bye-bye.